When Senator Elizabeth Warren officially announced her run for president, she laid out a platform of populist ideals that might just have left you with a sense of déjà vu.
Hardworking people are up against a small group that holds far too much power, not just in our economy, but also in our democracy. The rich and powerful use fear to divide us. We're done with that.
In that speech, Warren also pledged to end corruption in Washington, to address high health care costs, and she announced her campaign wouldn't accept corporate PAC donations. If it all sounds a little bit familiar, it's not only because we've heard this stuff from Warren before. Remember this guy from the last presidential campaign?
There is something profoundly wrong when the top 0.1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. And all over this country, people are working not one job, but 2 jobs, 3 jobs, trying to cobble together an income and some health care. That is not acceptable.
That, of course, was Senator Bernie Sanders announcing his first presidential run in 2015. Since then, many of Sanders' democratic socialist policies have gone from fringe ideas to party staples, especially that pledge to get money out of politics. At least 4 of the other 12 Democrats officially running for president, in addition to Warren and Sanders, have all pledged not to take corporate donations. And now that the Bernie 2020 campaign is in full swing, the pledge is not hurting his bottom line. He's raised more than $10 million so far since he announced his run last week, including nearly $6 million on the day he announced, dwarfing Elizabeth Warren's first day total of just under $300,000. So, is the primary big enough for the two of them, and which one would be the strongest candidate against Donald Trump? Joining me, our local author, Jen Deaderick, a Warren supporter, Democratic State Senator Jamie Eldridge, who was a Sanders delegate in 2016, and Democratic State Rep Nika Elugardo, who was endorsed by Sanders' Our Revolution PAC last fall, but is still undecided in 2020. Thank you all for being here. Jen, let's start with you, since you are the one person in this group who's completely decided. Why are you backing Elizabeth Warren and not Bernie Sanders in this election cycle?
Well, Elizabeth Warren is, for one thing, she's about details. You could wake her up at 2 in the morning, and she could tell you in detail about any of her policy positions while riding a unicycle, juggling, and balancing a ball in her nose. You know, she's totally in on knowing how she would do things, knowing how she would go about getting things done. And she's done, you know, she built a federal agency. She's passionate. She's been working on this stuff for a long time. I think of Sanders, and I think of his Daily News interview back in 2016 where he complained that they asked him questions at 9 in the morning and he didn't have detailed policy. So that's why, for me, that's why Warren in terms of stuff. And she's also very grassroots.
But you love the attention to detail, especially around policy.
I love the attention to detail.
It has seemed like there's been a sort of a steady procession of big policy initiatives announced by her. I think yesterday, am I right? It's hard to tell time these days. Yesterday it was the pledge to not give special access to big money donors. Before that, it was universal child care. I think we have actually a little bit of video and sound of her talking up her child care plan. Let's take a look at that.
I'm introducing a major proposal. It's unlike anything we've ever tried before in the United States that would make sure that we have universal child care and real investment in early learning for 0 to 5. Every parent should have access to child care, and it's going to be free for most families.
And Jamie, to Jen's point, she does get into more detail there, right? She says it's going to be 0%, a 0% cost for people up to 2 times the federal poverty level, that it'll be maxed out at 7% child care assistance with this new federal program she imagines for people of any income at all. As someone who backed Sanders last time and is kind of wavering this time, is Jen right that Warren is more, has fleshed out the details more than Sanders has at this stage?
Well, I think it's accurate to say that I think Senator Sanders has always, focused on some key themes, and because he is a democratic socialist, often it's from a perspective of a more universal perspective that's been his entire career. Whether you're talking about single-payer health care, whether you're talking about free college. Elizabeth Warren, I believe, is also a very strong progressive. I do think they're a little bit different. I would definitely agree with Jen that Elizabeth is extremely detail-oriented, but I think Sanders has touched upon some key themes that sync up with what Elizabeth Warren is talking about right now as well.
Anything that she has not brought up that he has?
Well, I think that in my view, it's that Senator Sanders, this is part of why I think so many people really like him, is he's been consistent throughout his entire career. He's had these positions for over 40 years. And so I think that's why people see him as just a very real candidate. And I think that Elizabeth Warren, because she hasn't been advocating for these policies as long, people are coming to these ideas, they're liking them, but Sanders has the longer record.
Nika Elugardo, what do you see when you look at these two candidates?
I see nothing new, and that's what's of concern for me. And so I like a lot of their policies, both of them. I think they both have attention to raising up folks who have been shut out of systemic wealth gain opportunities. But what I'm not seeing is an overall message to engage all Americans in democracy. Our country, a lot of people are concerned that our democracy is failing. I don't think it's failing. I think it's young. And it needs leaders that are going to talk about how to mature our democracy, how to invite more people into every level of leadership, not just based on where they come from or what they look like, but based on their income, based on all kinds of factors. What would it look like to bring folks into the highest levels of leadership? And so policies are great. We need our Congress people to be good at policies. But what a president needs to do is lead the values of the country. And so far, I don't see any candidate doing that.
Can you give me an example of a proposal that you would like to hear floated by either Sanders or Warren or any other candidate in the field that would do what you're saying neither of them have managed to do at this point?
I would love to hear them take on the Democratic Party and to say, what is it that we're doing to perpetuate some of the same realities that we're talking about? What would it look like for the Democratic Party? And so they're doing a little bit in the step of sort of with economic justice and to say, well, we don't want to give any benefits to higher donors, but that's relatively new. And I think they need to be more specific in pointing out the ways that the Democratic Party has perpetuated some of these ills.
Now, I got to point out, and then I'll let you get in here,
Yeah.
you make that critique as someone who is a Democratic legislator right now, but you're a fairly recent
True.
convert, right, to being a registered Democrat. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that means you're wrong, but just a footnote worth noting. What were you going to say in response to your Beacon Hill colleague?
Well, I agree with Representative Elugardo said. What I would add is that I think the campaign platforms of Elizabeth Warren saying that she's no longer going to raise money through high dollar donors, images of her making calls to regular
now
donors.
I'm interrupting you.
Yep.
She'll take money from high dollar donors, but she just won't give them special access, right? She's still happy to get a hefty check if you have the means to write it, but she's not going to give you one-on-one time. Or something.
Right, the behind closed doors fundraisers, and just to see her now, on the phone calling a regular donor from Kansas or the Midwest is wonderful to see. So I think in some ways that's a critique of the Democratic Party currently being too centrist, being too owned by corporations, and I think Sanders and Warren come from the same wing of challenging the Democratic Party and saying we need to move away from being dominated by corporate interests. So I think that's what's refreshing by both of them.
And I would say, in terms of, and speaking to your saying that Sanders has held the same positions for 40 years, is if we're talking about change and about having somebody who's listening to the populists, I would rather, someone who is able, has been able to change their positions over time after hearing information, hearing new information. To me, that seems preferable to someone who's still holding on to this is what I thought 40 years ago, and I still think it should be this way.
I got to ask the three of you how you expect gender to play out in this race, because it seems to me, I always get made fun of for identifying myself as a white male on camera because it's pretty evident I'm a white male, but it seems to me as a white male that we're at a political moment here in America in which attentiveness to both racial identity, ethnic identity, and gender identity is especially important in the world of politics. And I'm wondering if Elizabeth Warren might benefit from that. Let's take a listen to what Senator Sanders had to say. This was in a CNN town hall. He got, no one knows why CNN is scheduling certain candidates first. He got a town hall. She has not gotten one yet. And he was asked about sexual harassment in his 2016 campaign. Here's what he had to say.
I was very upset to learn what I learned. When I ran for re-election in Vermont in 2018, we instituted, I think, maybe the strongest protocols against sexual harassment, and that will be the protocols we bring into the 2020 presidential election. We take this issue very, very seriously.
So that's just one specific charge, obviously, but is it possible that being a woman is going to help Elizabeth Warren pull away some people who might have supported Sanders in the past?
I hope so. I mean, I would rather have a woman who's actually experienced that sort of thing be in that position than a man who's just assuring me that he will look into it and take it seriously. I already know that Elizabeth Warren will take it seriously because she's lived it.
How do you two see gender playing out here? And actually, as you get ready to answer, let me just note one thing. I followed Warren in Iowa right when she announced her exploratory committee, and then I was with her in Puerto Rico a little bit. I've seen her in New Hampshire. And I have heard some women say, we're afraid that she's going to get hit with the misogyny that we think Hillary Clinton was hit with last time around. And I've had other women say, when I've mentioned those concerns to them, that's ridiculous. What are we supposed to do? Just not run another woman for president? How do you two see gender playing out?
I would say that, I think being a female candidate, I think with other candidates of color, I think that's a benefit in Democratic primary. So I think it's something that aids candidates. I think that's why Senator Harris, in part has gathered a lot of support as well. So there's no doubt that I think it's generally an advantage. There's no doubt there's misogyny in politics by voters. That's unacceptable, and certainly for Senator Sanders, I think he needs to do more to address the problems in his campaign from 3 years ago. But I do think he's working to address those things.
Nika Elugardo, would being a woman, if she were to become the Democratic nominee, would that help Elizabeth Warren as she tried to unseat President Trump?
I think it's a wash, because you get some support because you're a woman, you get some antagonism because you're a woman. I think what we really need to be looking at is what are the candidates going to do for women, and what is their ability to recognize all women, regardless of their religious background, their race. And there's no one based on what they look like or what their own gender is that's able to do that based on their own thinking. What I'd love to see from all of the candidates is less focus on themselves and more focus on what they're learning from others. I know that will come as the campaign unfolds, but as it is now, it's just a traditional silverback gorilla model of leadership. Look at me, I'm going to bring home the berries, I'm going to show you what's right. And that actually reflects a form of...
You said the silverback gorilla model of leadership?
Well, like primates that aren't human, they assess who their leaders are based on what they're going to do for everyone. Right? But a natural distinctive that we have as human beings, we have the ability to lead by inspiring leadership in others. And I know that most of the candidates that are running on the Democratic ticket have a history and ability to do that, but I have not seen it in their conversations, whether it's a conversation about gender or anything else.
Unfortunately, we got to leave it there. Nika Elugardo, Jamie Eldridge, Jen Deaderick, thank you all for being here.
Great, thank you.